a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues.
Congratulations, Katharine Birbalsingh, on your CBE, the Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. Arguably, that makes you a child of the British Empire. Born in New Zealand.
Indeed.
You lived in Toronto as well, I believe.
In Canada, yes.
And then you went to Oxford University doing French and philosophy and set up Michaela School in 2014. Now, certain controversy about the CBEs, OBEs and MBEs and the British Empire part to it. And certainly Benjamin Zephaniah decided not to have one, as he has been fighting against the legacy of empire all his life. So tell me, what is it about the British Empire and the medals that allows you to say, that's fine, I'll have that?
Well, because, I mean, you know, it's just a title nowadays. I mean, I don't think we're celebrating the empire because there is no empire. My parents from the Caribbean, actually. My mum is from Jamaica and my father's from British Guyana. And they were really proud and thought it was brilliant. When Benjamin Zephaniah says he's fighting the legacy of empire, I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. Perhaps he means something like modern day racism. But well, we're all fighting the various issues that are in society nowadays. That include poor schooling, that why poor children fail, whatever color they are in schools. I mean, there's lots of things that I'm fighting. I like the Queen. You know, I like the fact that we have a royal family. I sort of feel that if you don't have a royal family, you end up with Trump and Tom Cruise. And what I mean by that is a country needs someone to kind of talk about, a family to talk about, to gossip about, to be interested in who they're marrying and what they're doing and all that sort of thing. And if you don't have a royal family, then either you have a president who people hate or adore and they argue about that, or you have members of Hollywood, for instance, who people adore in that way. And those people aren't very good at setting the tone in terms of how we should behave. And I think our Queen does a very good job of setting the tone. So I like her.
Okay. Well, that's no, that seems and in your when you won the award, when you were awarded the award, you were very clear at saying you felt it was an award for Michaela and everybody who was involved in the school.
Yes, definitely. Right. And that's because you know, I one of the reasons why we will have received the award is because of the way in which Michaela has had influence across the country in terms of teaching methods and behavior systems and so on. We get over 600 visitors a year to the school, mainly from teachers across Britain, but actually we get teachers from all over the world. And we've had hundreds of letters from head teachers, deputy heads, teachers, just ordinary teachers in their classrooms, who have said, "Thank you so much. I've taken ideas and I've put them in my school, and they've made our school much better." So I'm really proud. There are really two things I'm proud of. One, the school and what we do for the children here in Brent, and secondly, the impact that we have had on the wider educational community. So as I said to my staff on the Monday morning after the award was given, this is for all of us, because when the guests come round, I mean, it's true, some of them talk to me and, you know, we talk about how the place is run and leadership things, but all of them go into all the classrooms and they see our teachers teaching and the children as well. You know, it belongs to them too, because our visitors are always amazed by our children and how engaged they are in lessons, how happy they are, how clever they are in their questioning, and how, you know, they all want to become various different professions and they all want to go to Oxford and Cambridge, etc. And it's a real thrill for us, but it's true when we get guests here, it always opens my eyes a little, because they just remind me of how extraordinary, you know, the school is. And I do think it's extraordinary. Whenever I go round and, you know, you go into any classroom, I can guarantee you will never see a child off task. You will never see a child not engaged. They're always tracking the teacher or they're working. there's a real sense of team in the school where we're all in it together. And that I'm really proud of that. And that belongs to all of us. And therefore, the CBE belongs to everyone at Michaela.
Right.
You talk in your latest book, a Michaela book, which I think came out a few months ago, The Power of Culture.
There we go.
There it is. Now, the importance of culture. Now, one of the things I'm particularly interested in is the use of poetry and song, including Jerusalem and I Vow to Thee, My Country, which I think has got some lyrics within it that sum quite a few things about your school. But why song and why poetry?
Yeah. So again, it's about building a sense of unity and togetherness. You know, our children are from many different ethnic backgrounds, many different religions, many different cultures. And so in order to bring everyone together, sort of like, you know, they do on a football field, you get everybody chanting together, singing together. And we talk about being part of the Michaela family. And just this morning at assembly, I was saying that one of the reasons why we're a Michaela family is that we know what goes on here. We know how to walk through corridors quickly, quietly to our lessons, and we all take it for granted. We don't think there's anything strange about that. But actually, the fact that everything is quick and quiet and lovely, that's quite an amazing achievement. And it's something that all of us achieve together, and all of us buy into it. We get it. You know, if you ask the children here, as many of the guests who've been, well, I mean, you've been obviously, will say to you, that the children always say in the first few months when they come, it's a bit difficult and they find it hard to adapt. And then they eventually get the hang of it and they think, oh, wow, this is great because now I feel safe in the corridors. Nobody's going to beat me up. Nobody's going to chase me around. Nobody's going to scream in my face. It's all very quick. They don't necessarily realize this, but it means they get quickly to their lessons. So when you're trying to catch up an 11-year-old who has the reading age of a 7-year-old, well, you have that many more minutes in your lesson. And if you add up those missed minutes that happen from lessons over an entire year, you miss out hours and days and weeks, frankly, of learning. So it's just really exciting to be part of that team. And that's why we bring everybody together with our singing and our chanting. We choose I Vow to Thee, My Country, God Save the Queen and Jerusalem, because these are songs of our country. And we believe, as I said, we like the Queen. And the reason for that, I mean, look, it's not like I'm some royalist. I don't have plates with the Queen's face on it and all of that. In fact, I've only just started watching The Crown just recently, you know, like 3 weeks ago or something, the series 1. And that was only because I so happened to just get Netflix. I hadn't had Netflix before, so I'd never watched it. And all of my senior team kept saying, you've got to see The Crown, Katharine, you've got to see The Crown. And so I have to say I do love it. But if I was obsessed with royalty, I would have watched the first series when it first came out. But the reason why it works really well in terms of culture for a school is that you've got to have a kind of hierarchy. So the children have their teachers who are in charge of them. And then there are heads of department, there are heads of year, there's your middle management. And then you've got your deputy heads and assistant heads, and those are your senior management. And then you've got the head teacher at the top. And what's really good is when it doesn't just stop with me. I can point above me and say, and there is the Queen. And so when we say, you know, be like the Queen, you know, we want to behave with tea. And that's why it's so important that the royal family, the members of the royal family should behave with dignity. Now, that isn't always the case, as you found when Margaret is behaving poorly, the young Margaret, and there are various issues, and Queen Elizabeth is trying to get her sister to behave herself. And I just believe in that. I think that I may sound very old-fashioned when I'm saying all of this, but I promise you it works. I mean, that it gives a weight to the school. A weight that means that, here's a good example. I remember this boy. He's gone off now. He was in year 11. Very, very naughty boy. Very naughty. And he had misbehaved, and he was essentially running around the school. I mean, this is something that doesn't ever happen here, but this happened once. I can think of this ever happening. Him. And he was running around the school, and lunch was going on. Now, lunch is such a central part of Michaela is. You know, we serve each other food. We do our chanting at the beginning. There's a topic of conversation. The children always sit in the same place. We clean up after each other and so on. They give appreciations at the end. So it's a very special time. And I remember him coming down and he went to the lunch doors. Now, he could have could have run into the lunch hall and screamed, his head off, and then run out again. He could have done that. And as I say, he was a very troubled child. And he got to the lunch doors and he stopped. And he turned around and he ran down and he ran out of the school. And there was something that stopped him from going into that lunch hall. And I would argue that it was the weight of the lunch and it was the weight of the school. It was just too much to go into that lunch hall. And the way in which, because as a school, you're constantly trying to create a kind of illusion, because there's far fewer of us than there are of them. So in order to get them to behave, there's a bit of a trick that's being played the whole time. They've got to admire and respect us to behave. People often think, Michaela they're all a bunch of bouncers and they're standing around and you better behave. But if that were the case, the children simply wouldn't behave, because there are many more of them than there are of us. You have got to have the majority buy-in. I always say detentions are for the 15% who were really naughty. And even a boy like him, when it came to lunch, boom, he stopped. And the thing that stopped him was the weight of the school. And the only way you can create weight, so Eton, for instance, very easy to create weight. I remember I once went to visit Eton. They took me into some room where they showed me how Shelley had carved his name into the wood that was there. So Eton has weight because it's Eton, and it's old, and it's selective, and it's prime ministers or whatever have been there and so on. So it's very easy. They just have to exist, and they have weight. It's easy for the royal family to have weight because they are the royal family. For Michaela, which is just some silly school that's been open 6 years, well, how do we give ourselves weight? It's all through creating certain kind of traditions and routines and a sort of pretense in order to create an atmosphere. So the children always stand for me at assembly, for instance, and their head of year says, "Please stand for the headmistress." And then I walk in. Now, some people might say they stand and then they sit down. Some people might say, "Oh, well, Katharine obviously has a massive ego." It's nothing to do with me. It's about creating a certain aura to build that weight around the school so that they don't misbehave and so that they buy into what we're about and so that they can be happy and feel safe and protected and so that we can all be a team so that when their headmistress gets a CBE, it belongs to us all.
Right.
I like the idea of you second only to the Queen. Actually,
so, Katharine, all of the work that you've put into the culture of Michaela, obviously, like every other school in the country, I would imagine has been tested over this academic year with all of the challenges that everyone's having to face about being in a global pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I know you've had your challenges at Michaela. And it'd be interesting to hear about some of the things that you've had to deal with. But you've also gone on record as saying that there are some silver linings to what maybe has had to happen in order to cope with the effects of the pandemic. Would you mind telling us a little bit about, both the obviously very real downsides and what some of the possible silver linings for the system might be?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was because of what I saw on Twitter, that various schools were obviously changing their ways of doing things. They were putting desks in rows. The teacher was having to stand at the front of the class and teach, whereas perhaps normally the desks were in groups and the teacher would move amongst the desks and keep the children on task. And I believe very much in a traditional education. All of the classrooms here, the teacher stands at the front and the desks are in rows. So we didn't have to make that many changes. It was already the case. I mean, our year groups were already in bubbles, so now we've just bubbled further into form groups. It was already the case that our children walked in single file in silence in the corridors, so that everything was very orderly. So there haven't been. I mean, we've made some changes, but I doubt we've had to make as many changes as perhaps in other schools. But the interesting thing for me is that I was finding that on Twitter, the teachers were saying, "Oh, look, actually, it does work better doing it like this. So maybe I'll keep this once COVID is gone." I certainly know from all the visitors who've come here who changed the methods in their classrooms that they certainly find that it works better. And it certainly works very well here. And when people come, and I always say to people, do come and see, the children know so much, are so clever at being able to have discussions, have so many of their own opinions that are well informed. These are things that are achieved through a traditional way of teaching. So I feel that COVID has brought that about more so, even more so perhaps than Michaela has elsewhere.
So, Katharine, tell us a little bit about, you just before we started recording, you were saying you unfortunately had to send some classes home, and one of the classes you've been in the position of having to send home is Year 11 class.
Yeah.
Can you, with that in mind, what's your position on exams and assessment this year, particularly?
Yeah, good question. And it's not so obvious. I think people just assume I'm a traditionalist, therefore I believe in exams. And I mean, look, I do sort of think there isn't any choice. We have to go with exams. We saw the fiasco that was last year with teacher assessment. It ends up being a nonsense. So we can't do teacher assessment. I think we do end up having to do exams. But I find it very problematic because if I just think about our own children here, one of my Year 11 classes got sent home. And yes, we taught them on Zoom, and yes, we do Google Classroom and so on. But we have found that if you're not able to hold the children to account for their learning, which you cannot do on Zoom, then the children don't learn very much. They learn something, but nowhere near as much as they do in a classroom. And I think for 20 years or more, there's always been this debate about whether or not tech can replace the teacher. COVID has put that to bed forever. It is very obvious now. Tech can never replace a real teacher in a real classroom, especially for disadvantaged children. They need us propping them up, inspiring them, quizzing them constantly in lessons to see whether or not they actually know this stuff. Zoom, that's possible because they've got the stuff in front of them, and you can't, when they're on the Zoom, they've got their papers there. So it is impossible to hold them to account. And that is a great travesty, obviously, in particular for Year 11 or Year 13 classes that end up being sent home. I've had to send home 2 classes, one Year 8, which obviously was sad, but at least they're in Year 8. For Year 11, I thought, well, gosh, this class now is at a disadvantage in comparison to my other 3 Year 11 classes. And that's just in our school. Having said that, there are disadvantaged children all over the country who happen to be perhaps in not a very good school, happen to have a not very good, I don't know, science teacher or French teacher or English teacher or whoever it is. In many ways, the system has always been flawed because some children get lucky and get to a great school and some children are in not so good schools. So perhaps it's no different, but I feel that unfairness quite a lot this year, and I feel sad for our kids, but I mean, there isn't really much we can do to plow on and hope for the best.
Right.
It's best that they're in school, as you say, though, rather than at home, though, and as much as possible. And certainly a poor kid I've heard of who's been sent home 3 times already this last term. It's ridiculous. I'm interested.
Definitely.
I'm interested in the difference between 2 of the things perhaps that your critics most point out, and this is about authoritarianism and authority, and where that line between authority and authoritarianism might be, because you get compared to all sorts of whether it be North Korea or whatever, this sort of thing about authoritarianism. So I'm perhaps thinking about it in terms of means and ends as well. What are your ends? What's your end point for your kids?
Well, we stole the motto from KIP, which was work hard, be nice, but we decided to make it slightly different, made it work hard, be kind. And I've always said that obviously you want lots of different things for your children. But if at the very least, for every child who goes through Michaela, they can at the end be somebody who works hard and is kind, and that is just who they are, as opposed to having to work hard to get to that point. We've worked hard at making it a habit. So that's just the people that they are when they leave us, then I feel that we've achieved something. So that's our end goal. Clearly, we want them to pass exams. We also want them to be good people. And that's why we do our lunches the way we do and our appreciations. We teach them gratitude. We teach them kindness, in a very explicit way. And that means that when a child drops a plate in the dining hall, the kids don't all go as they might do elsewhere. In fact, 3 or 4 of the children will rush to help them pick up the plate and help them, get out of the situation they're in. So kindness is big here because I think we should be developing the whole child. So those are our goals. The question is, do we achieve them? And obviously you can only come to the school and talk to the kids, see what they're like. Are they nice to each other? Are they knowledgeable? Do they have their own opinions on things? I would say that teaching them as we do, it means that they form their own opinions, and their opinions are, well, they're really educated, you know, they know stuff. And sadly, I think too often people think that by not concentrating on knowledge, children will somehow develop the skill of being able to think for themselves. But I would say you can only think for yourself about something if you know lots about that thing. So that's the teaching side of things. In terms of behavior, I mean, you said about North Korea. The fact is that all of our visitors will always say they've never seen so much energy in classrooms, so much love. The teachers are so into the kids. My teachers love the children. I love the children. You, like I said earlier, you cannot get a whole school to behave through these methods of detention. I mean, you just can't. You have to get buy-in from the kids. And you're only going to get buy-in from the kids if you love them. The kids need to know that you're on their side. And you do that by building relationships, by chatting to them about their weekends and their sisters and their brothers and what they want to be in life and so on. And you have conversations of, don't let me down this time. Come on, I know you can do better than that, and that sort of thing. That's what you do. Now, of course, when they say North Korea, look, we have a behavior policy. We follow through on that behavior policy. All schools have behavior policies. It's just that lots of the time they don't follow through on the behavior policy. We do. That's the only difference. I mean, well, we say you're not allowed to talk in lessons without permission, then we make through. And so that means if a child talks when he's not meant to, you know, he chats to his friend or something, he gets a detention. I mean, and I don't understand what the big deal is. So you have a 20-minute detention. You do a bit of work in your detention. What do you do? I mean, they're children. They'll get over it. I mean, I just don't get why that's so problematic. And if you do that with the little things, you see, the big things never happen. So I told you about the story about the child running around. I mean, that never happens. I remember, and he'd been taken out of his lesson. I remember teachers would come here. I say I remember because, of course, we don't have guests at the moment. So that is one big change that we've made. But when we did have guests, teachers would always come and they'd ask me things like, well, what do you do when a pupil tells you to F off? What do you do when a pupil gets up out of the class and walks out? What do you do when a pupil hits another child over the head with his chair? And I always say, well, that's never happened. I mean, it doesn't happen at this school. And they say, well, how is that possible? And I say, because we look after the little things. If you get detention for the tiny things, the children simply don't do the big things. I mean, so again, I don't know why anybody have a problem with children not telling the teacher to F off. I mean, this I would have thought is a real positive. It's a really good thing. I don't know why people don't like the idea of children behaving. Sometimes people don't like that as well. They think that the children aren't able to express themselves. But I would argue that when 20% of our country is leaving school functionally illiterate and functionally innumerate, they are literally unable to express themselves. And when children cannot articulate and cannot write and cannot sound as if they know what they're talking about, because both they're lacking the knowledge and the skills to be able to say what they want, often they just get into fights. That's what happens, because they don't know how else to express themselves. And that's a horrible position to put a child in. It's our duty as teachers to teach them and to mold them so that they are able to have the skills that will make them successful in life. And I don't understand what the problem with that is, really.
And you're talking there about the importance of knowledge, and that brings us on to curriculum. We're in the middle of Black History Month at the moment. And can you tell me how you approach Black History Month?
Yeah, well, we don't do Black History Month. That's how we approach it. I don't believe in it. I find it grossly insulting. I mean, where's the Chinese History Month, and where's the Polish History Month, and where's the White History Month? It's just absolutely absurd. You lump all these black people together. There are Ghanaians, and there are Nigerians, and there are Jamaicans, and there are, Somalis. I mean, are they all the same? They all have the same history. I mean, I find the whole thing completely absurd. And then what happens is, in Black History Month, all the deputy heads go round and give an assembly on Rosa Parks, because obviously she is the only black person who's ever existed. I mean, I find the whole thing ridiculous. What schools ought to be doing instead is making sure that their history curriculum includes black figures and black historical events in this country. So when I say in this country, or that are part of British history, because obviously British history did span the globe, as we referred to at the beginning with the empire. So it's important that once upon a time, the million Indian soldiers that were in the world wars, the several 100,000 Caribbean soldiers, again, in the world wars to help save this country, and they gave their lives, they were never mentioned, and they were literally whitewashed out of history. And black people in this country had to campaign for many years to get a monument up in central London to recognize the contribution of the Commonwealth. So I strongly believe in that. However, what we don't want to do is then say, so we just, Black history, even the term Black history makes me annoyed. It's not Black history. It's about teaching British history and making sure Black people are included in it. And that's what we do here. So our history curriculum is really thorough, really good, because we're teaching from the front of the class. We're teaching explicitly. Our children really learn their history. And we make sure that as part of that British history, they learn about India and Gandhi and the Amritsar massacre and the Mau Mau massacre in Kenya and slavery. And we also do, actually, because we also do civil rights and so on in America, simply because it's had such impact. And so we think that's an important thing that they should learn. There's a whole variety of things that we include in that curriculum. Now, that's important. And if that isn't being done in some schools, that's a problem. But to throw Black people a bone of Black History Month and say, there you go, we'll just do Rosa Parks every week in assembly is ridiculous and insulting. And I don't agree with it.
Well, that's really clear. And so the other calls that, and I think you've probably sort of started to address this a little bit. Well, when people talk about decolonising the curriculum, what do you make those sorts of requests or demands?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what they mean. I mean, if they mean what I just said, make sure that you haven't got a whitewashed curriculum, then that's a good thing. If, on the other hand, it means that you're not going to teach much Shakespeare, then I have a problem with that, because Shakespeare is universal. He speaks to us all. It doesn't matter that he's white. This idea that Black children cannot identify with Shakespeare because he's white is ridiculous. Your skin color of the author does not determine whether or not a child can understand what the author's talking about. And when someone like Shakespeare has had influence over 400 years of literature, and someone like, say, Maya Angelou used to say that she always thought that Shakespeare was a Black woman because he understood the plight of Black women so well. It is because it is universal. And I do worry about this trend of thinking that skin color is the overarching factor that decides whether or not we can understand something. It really isn't. We're all human underneath, and that's what matters.
Okay. No, I think that's a good answer. Thank you, Katharine.
Okay.
Katharine, it's been, I know we're coming up to the end of the interview now, unfortunately, because it's been a fascinating romp, shall we say, through the work of Michaela and snippets of your own life and everything like that. I don't know if you know the Hannah Arendt piece about the crisis in education.
No, I don't think I do.
Right, she's you should read it. I think you'd get a lot of things from it. Mm-hmm. But to just to give a quote from it, it seems to me that she says this. It seems to me that conservatism, in the sense of conservation, is of the essence of the educational activity, whose task is always to cherish and protect something of the child against the world against the child, the new against the old, and the old against the new. Conservatism she's talking about here, in the sense of conserving, not a political conservatism, which she argues against. But do you find that that's part of what you want to do, and perhaps it makes you slightly out of step with the newness?
Yes, absolutely. I always say I'm a small C conservative, meaning I'm not a big C conservative. I really am not. I'm a small C conservative in that I'm a traditionalist. I'm old-fashioned in my views. And those values are very much embedded in the school. And so when we talk about the power of culture in our book, we're talking about all of these small C conservative values that are everywhere in the school, and I think give us the weight that we need to make sure that our children achieve. And yes, I would agree that some of the new, when we say the new of the last 60 years or so, I reject some of those trendy ways of teaching and trendy ways of raising children, because I don't think they work.
Katharine, I will send you a link to the Hannah Arendt. Sorry, David.
No, Katharine, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. Thanks ever so much for allowing us to waste a little bit of your very valuable time, and I hope we see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, guys.